So, this is a fun one to produce, a fun video. It's Scuttlebutt 11, and it's theoretically going to go live on the 11th of June, but could go live on the 4th of June, depending on how things happen. And it could go live as a video, it could go live as a premiere, because whilst I like premieres, because people get to chat away in them and talk and have quite a bit of fun time, as far as I'm concerned, in the chat, it does seem rather meta to make it to have a Scuttlebutt, which is a comp response video, go live with a chat running. It seems a bit interesting, but we'll see. We'll see. So let's start off with the first one. Lexington's Assaults, how turboelectric has evolved. Now, this is an interesting one because the principles really haven't evolved, but the machinery we're using in terms of its efficiency has evolved greatly. So it's one of those things of, the question that came in was, kind of unrelated, but does anybody, this is from Nathan, does anybody have any idea what, besides name, is the difference between integrated power system on a Zomot class and the American turboelectric drives of old? Well, as said, there is the efficiency of the systems involved, the metallurgy that's gone into them, the way they're designed, and how much power they can produce, and the systems backing them up. But also there's the fact that an integrated power system is just that. Everything is integrated into that power system. So it's not just like it's driving the engines or just driving the propellers or something like that. It's not just providing the power principally for the machinery. It is providing the power for other systems. And in fact, if you look at some of the modern warships and some modern vessels, most of the time, the largest draws on the power supply and the integrated power system are not propulsion, and definitely not hotel load, which is what we call the stuff needed to keep the crew alive. Food, refrigeration, cleanliness, those things. That it's not that. It is quite literally, it is the weapon systems they're carrying, the sensor systems they're carrying. This did actually lead to an interesting discussion recently because the integrated power systems are really, really quite cool and quite capable. But the amount of times I read some very interesting stats come out about modern systems and their capabilities written by people, and they're completely serious. I was reading one the other day, which was a comment, which was modern sonar can only has a range of 2,400 meters. No, it really doesn't. There are some civilian versions of sonar which do have that range and that limitation when you go start hunting for them, especially some of the pulse radar, which is pulse sonar, which is made to map the seabed, and some of those systems. But when he realised the ships that carry those that usually use those systems are usually quite small vessels and probably weigh as much as the computers do on a modern SSN, a nuclear-powered submarine, a nuclear-powered attack submarine, that kind of tells you there's a difference going on here. And honestly, it is the computing power which is the really big difference. The computing power, the sensitivity, and the size of the array, all these things have a big difference. And and it all requires a lot of power. And that's what an integrated power system is about. It's about everything. And usually you have multiple power systems. So if you have damage, let's say one of your generators go down, your gas turbines goes down, you've still got enough power generation on the system that you should still be able to run most of the systems and start triaging your system properly. Now, if you were designing sensibly according to the lines which, well, to be honest, my dad and a few others who were naval architects at the time were advocating when the Type 45 program was originally being done with an integrated power system, you should factor in so that your power generation as you're building ship should be 150% of the capacity you will need. So if you need to shut stuff down for maintenance, you can. If you get battle damage, that doesn't matter. So basically, you need 2 gas turbines, that's fine. We'll have a pack 3. Because, and this was the argument was made, was based on the cost of not having those systems and then having the things not be available is not just an opportunity cost, it could be a loss of unit cost. It could be irreparable damage to this vessel cost. Whereas if you have the extra equipment, then yes, you have it, but also it's easier to do ongoing maintenance when the ship's at sea. You can, oh, well, we instead of us needing to dry dock and maybe go into port or maybe scale down our operations and not be able to do what we're able to do because this gas turbine now needs to be replaced. No, you can take it apart and put in a new gas turbine while you're at sea, if you've designed the system correctly, because you've still got two to run everything, so you're still running at 100% capacity. This argument for how to get more out of ships and how to make ships more available was to actually, for things which are core systems, you build in a redundancy which is more than you need, so that the redundancy can provide for battle damage but also can provide for ongoing maintenance of the vessel while it's carrying out its operations. And that can make life a little bit easier. It can make life a little bit easier. Just a little bit. And I hope that answers the question. And then we can move on to CVA-01. Now, I have to admit, with this question from and it's literally UMHHM, so I almost didn't respond. Because I have a rule, which quite a few people are aware of, but not everyone seems to follow this channel, that I will never argue with another historian when they're not here to have a right for reply. When they're not here to respond, I tend to just go, or ignore them. If I disagree with them, if I agree with them, I talk about them. If I disagree with them, I just don't respond. I don't talk about them, and I just don't respond. It's my view as they don't have a right to respond. If you're going to say something nice about someone, they don't need a right. It's nice if they respond, but they don't have to. They're not coming in to defend their honour. So when someone starts off a question of, like Edward Hampshire said that RN manning problems also contributed to cancellation of CVA-01, I was not sure what to say, but I thought, well, I'll respond quietly. It's a comment, and I can explain my point. Not real, and the response was not really. This is something which has often been added in afterwards. The transition from a national service to an all-volunteer force had left a running legacy. There was still affecting things 4 years later, but at the time the Navy was a lot bigger, and CVA-1s would have required less crew than the ships they would replace. So while some do highlight the issue, it's more a problem looking backward than one carried weight at the time. Now, then carries that on, and there's a full ongoing discussion. And I would say it was interesting for me to get involved with, but what really made me almost delete it, and I will say this, is because of this. Thank you. When two different views of an important historical turning point are presented by two historians, it's nice to elaborate. To me, that I'm sure it's not intended to come across the way, but it comes across the way as there should be only one interpretation of events. That historians, if we disagree, there must be one who's right and one who's wrong. And that's not quite the case here, as I tried to explain at the end. I don't really see it as a difference of views. Just a difference of emphasis. I see cutting the carriers and the Navy as part of the decision to focus on Germany and the desire to try to reduce defence spending overall. And from my reading of Hampshire's work, he sees the reduction of personnel as a factor in the cutting of the carrier programme. Basically, mine is they didn't want to do Navy, so they cut the carriers and then crew. His view is they didn't want to do Navy, so they cut the crew and then that contributed to cutting the carriers. We both agree about the process, just differ on the order of priority. And to me, that makes sense, because there are some documents which suggest the Royal Navy was still trying to figure out a way to get it through. They're still trying to figure out a way to get a CVA-01 through, even once the decision is made. But then once the next stage of cuts, which include personnel numbers and everything, are being forced through, then they can no longer find a way. But to be honest, that to me strikes more of them trying to resurrect something than trying to get a program started. And when the reasoning given, you don't need these numbers because you're not going to be doing full carrier battle groups anymore, so we can cut these people, is from the government, the treasury reasoning, then to me the carriers have been cut first, and that's that. But I can understand where Edward Hampshire's coming from. He's an excellent historian. I think we have met. but I'm not 100% sure because there was a conference a long time ago where I bumped into a lot of the people who do the Osprey works, and they're really nice people. And it was one of those big naval history conferences, and you meet lots of people. And I was a lot younger and probably, well, slightly thinner at the time, probably. But the thing is, it's an order of priority. It's not a difference. And as I said, I almost didn't get involved in that, and I still very cautious about getting on it because it started off with Edward Hampshire. If it had started off by saying, I've read elsewhere that our own manning problems also contribute to cancellation on CVA-01, I'd be happy answering that. Because then I'm not arguing with a specific historian. I'm not doing something which can then be commented back and oh, you're wrong because Dr. Alex Clarke says this. Because they're not in the right to respond, and that's how you end up with vicious backs and forth. And to me, as I said, he's not wrong. It's just I differ in how I read the documents because of my view is, well, they've already made a decision, so therefore that's that and that's that. His view is, well, they were still trying, so this division isn't permanent, so therefore is what I would take from what I've read of his documents and what I've read of his works. It's still an interesting thing to get into. But yeah, the CVA-01, that's a whole ball game. Realistically, getting the CVA-01 decision making, I still think to this today now, having replaced the Queen Elizabeth class, the Invincibles with 2 vessels, and with discussions coming in the SDSR, I would not be surprised if some of the increase of funding does go to some way to finding money for extra flight decks. They might be LHDs. Something might end up coming for it if the money really is delivered. Because having only 2 hulls does not give you that breadth of ability. And also, the other thing I've pointed out before is if you wanted to make the current Queen Elizabeth class fixed wing, you'd probably need to cut them down the middle and add in a load of stuff and add in a middle section, which you can do on a BAE design. You can add a bit in the middle. I'd also use it to add in some extra power generation because, especially if you're trying to go emails on a conventional route, you're going to need an extra gas turbine. You are going to need an extra one, at least an extra one. And so you might as well use the space to also add on extra space into your hangar. That's got to be helpful. It's got to be helpful. But I think that could cause all sorts of fun things because I'm not sure where exactly the line is on the Queen Elizabeth class. Usually it's roughly, in the BAE designs, they have a line where the hull can be cut in 2. It's designed to be cut and a bit has been inserted in the middle, sort of thing. And I think it's just after the forward island, but I'm not 100% certain. Because I only think that from looking at the pictures and the plans and trying to figure out in my head. It's not a point of weakness, by the way. That's the interesting thing. It's not a point of weakness in the hull or anything like that. No. It's just a position where it's designed to minimize the things going between this, that, and that section. So that's where you can cut. And all those things which are going between the lines, all the utilities, power cables, etc., are easy to find at that point and easy to locate without moving other stuff out the way. And basically, it's about minimizing costs for a future expansion operation. But I do think if you did want to go Catabar, you would be having to look at that as an option. And probably want to build those sections first, and then cut the ships and add them in. So they're ready, and so then you can have the minimal time of the ship being out of service. Although, you'd have to do all the commissioning trials again. Everything would have to be redone. And honestly, it might be quicker and easier to build a whole new carrier. I don't know. The world will decide if we ever get to that point. And then there's this. It's a little confusion of history. It is. It's from Stanis Skadamov, and they've commented on this on the Orion class. I think if they made a bigger leap, it's possible that a few of the technologies which did not really get developed in post-World War I would be already in place at the start. Whether that would be good or bad is a different question, especially since the war became more of a question of attrition and resources, which would drive the victory. I would say it's likely the chance of British victory would be reduced. On the other hand, if that happens, say in late 1916, there is no USSR and no trauma that would cause World War II, at least not with UK and France versus Germany, so we would live in a very different world, perhaps a war between a much weakened Europe and America somewhere in the late mid-20s. Okay, Stanis Levatovskumov, I'm not sure what you've been reading, because... Okay. The chance of a British victory being reduced. You see, if you change the personalities around, you might have a chance. You see? And also some of the other technological developments are things which are taking multinational developments, especially submarine development at the time. But I think you've got something wrong, because if you jump slightly faster on the Orions, if you jump faster on the Orion class, if they jump up to, let's say, 14-inch or larger weapons, I don't think that leads to the British losing World War One. It might lead to a very different war, because if the Germans drop out on a naval race earlier, and that's what I could see happening, because the problem with, and I always have to explain, I have to stress this, the problem is not Germany's capacity. Germany has the money. If they really wanted to compete, they could invest in infrastructure, they could compete with Britain on the naval treaty, but then on the naval base, the naval forces. But then they would have to stop spending money on the army. And considering Germany's massive land borders and the entrenchment of the army in national politics, good luck, is all I'll say. In fact, there's a reason why we often date the Royal Navy and Britain winning the naval race to the point at which the army turns around and says, no more funding for you, to the Navy. Because that's pretty much what stops the Navy being able... This is why we talk about it, we say the Queen Elizabeth class wins the naval race. Because the Germans, the Kaiserlich Marine wants the funding, but Tirpitz can't get the funding to compete with them. And this is why the Bardens, when they come out, are far more equivalents to the R class. But there again, Britain is building 8 of them on top of 6 Queen Elizabeths at that point. And the Bardens are a class of 4 that they actually complete 2 of. It's just... They've lost. They've lost at that point. So the question is, if you drive up the expense of battleships earlier on, dreadnoughts earlier on, does Germany drop out of the dreadnought race? If you add in technologies and drive up the cost, because it's going to cause them to have to get into a competition with the army over funds. And the here wins that 99 times out of 100. I know, I've done the one scenario where they could have a small chance of getting more funding. And worked it through, and it's very, very small chance. So the interesting thing is, if the Germans drop out on a naval race in 1910, and that reduces all the tensions with Britain, then there very much becomes a possibility that Britain doesn't get involved in World War One as long as the Germans don't go through Belgium. Because there are enough issues going on with Russia, they might choose not to. Now, that sounds terrible to say. After all, there was the honour and all these things which guided Britain to get involved in the war. But let's be honest, there was also a pragmatic problem that we couldn't afford to not fight the war, because Germany, if they win the war and get even stronger, can become an even greater challenge to us to sea, and so we can't afford not to get involved. But if Germany's given up the war, given up trying to build up the navy, and they're going to fight a massive land war, we might choose to be beneficent neutral to one side or the other. We might choose to supply arms and ammunition to the French and to the, to the French. I doubt we'd supply it to the Russians. The reason I doubt we'd supply it to the Russians, we might do, but we probably wouldn't want to because of what Russia have been doing in terms of Afghanistan and trying to head to India and the threats they've constantly been making in the Far East to our territories and the wider British Empire. You have to remember, Russia wasn't really Britain's friend at this point. The monarchies might be related, but that doesn't make them friends. We were friends with France because we needed a counterbalance to Germany. And traditionally we'd allied with Germany, with Prussia, as a way to offset the French and the Russians. When Germany decides that they don't just want to be the large army, but also want to have a large navy, that's when they become a threat to Britain. And again, there are so many people who, when they talk about this, start to try and sort of say, well, Britain shouldn't have seen it as a threat. Well, of course they're going to see it as a threat. If the world's most capable army suddenly decides they want to add on their own most capable navy, and you are the world's most capable navy, and have an empire dependent upon having your maritime strength and naval strength, why are you not going to perceive that as a threat? Under what circumstances do you not perceive that as a threat? The Germans wishing it so? Well, that's not going to work, because we're in the real world, and humans are humans. And humans tend to perceive things because of what they are, being omnivores, who both are predators and prey, depending on the circumstance, in terms of our biological history, as a threat, a friend, or not a threat. Those are our three settings. If you're a friend who's suddenly doing something which seems awfully threatening, it's kind of like if you have a friend, and let's say you have a friend, and they're one of your closest friends. You've always buddied up. Let's say you do race car driving together, and they're usually your navigator, and you're the driver. That's a partnership. And suddenly, they buy their own race car. And they start racing against you. They're still a friend, but that's going to add some tension to the relationship. Because they've spent years driving with you. They know all your tricks. They know all your habits. They've learned all the routes as you've driven them. But now they've deprived you of their navigation ability, and they are driving against you. It's not quite the same as between countries because national survival isn't online, but it's something to think about. It's something to think about. And from there, we move on to winning the treaty. Now, this is interesting to me too because Germans, talking about it, I have to admit, I tend to favour, and this is Jevon's comment, I tend to favour the idea the US won the treaty system. It had a bunch of ships on the slips that were too late for their generation, and Congress didn't want to pay for them. The treaty gave them an out of the left, then left them with 5 of the best ships in the world, even if they were slow. Britain really needed to not be left with the R-class as frontline units. G3 and N3 would have been just what the RN needed. The major downside of the treaty system is that when Second London happens, there's basically no reason whatsoever to build anything other than a 35,000-ton battleship until the 45,000-ton limit is introduced. It's interesting. It's interesting. I ended up, commenting backwards and forwards and discussing with it because it's an interesting point. Who wins the treaty system? And it's really interesting is how perception changes over time. Because at certain times in the past, people have thought Britain won the treaty system. At other times in the past, people have thought America. Nowadays, both pretty much agreed that both America and Britain hamstring themselves on the treaty system, so that's not really the case. And my view has always been that the nation which wins the treaty system is Italy. Has been for many years. Because Italy managed to hamstring France, stop Britain being able to basically annihilate it without even bothering, and get itself a status in the world where it is the third rank of naval power in the world, first rank being Britain and America, second rank being Japan, third rank being France and Italy, without having to do pretty much anything. Italy wins! Italy wins the treaty system. Massively. And it only gets worse as it goes on longer. You know, the leadership of the 1930 London Naval Treaty System, as I point out, neither Italy or France has to sign up to the submarine limitations. It's brilliant. The fact that because of their own limited infrastructure, they can't really take advantage of the advantages they have in that treaty system, and because of Mussolini being Mussolini, is neither here nor there. If any nation wins the naval treaty system, it's Italy. It really is. Everyone else loses. They either lose in terms of infrastructure, they lose in terms of ships they're able to build to better suit their needs. They lose in terms of the ability to respond to economic issues, such as the Great Depression. They all lose. But Italy, they win the treaty system. Definitely. Shameless book plug time. Time for me to say thank you to everyone who's liked, sharing, subscribing, and supporting the channel. It really does help it grow. Please, that subscribe button matters so much to all people who are content creators on YouTube. It really does. And also me to shamelessly plug my book. There are more coming soon. They will come soon. Currently, when I get mortgages, they're designed to torture you. But no, there are some special things going on, and I do want to talk about them quickly. Special things I've got going on at the moment. This month, you might have heard, but there is a special up on my spreadshirt saw. And sorry, I was trying to get the star of it up to pop up and say hello to you all, but he's decided that actually what he wants to do... Come on, Abby, come and say hello. See, this is the thing. While I'm live, you jump up all the time. When I'm just recording, you just lie on the floor the whole time going, you want to be patted, don't you? Yeah. Anyway, there is, for those who don't know, there is a special, currently, thing up on the spreadshirt, which is, on the spreadshirt sort, which is, for a month, the running image, which is of me and the senior fluffy research assistant out for a wander, is for sale on the various items. And the reason I've done that is because, well, my mum doesn't allow pictures of him to be put for sale, because she doesn't like that for her dogs. But she allowed that from up to say, well, just see if people actually like it and if people actually want it. If they do, then you can do some more chibi-ish images of the fluffy research assistants doing their fluffy research assisting work. You do lots of work, don't you? You do lots of work. You're very helpful. And so that will continue on. But that's as long as people are actually interested. If people aren't interested, then we'll go back to the ones which are just the normal pictures of warships and things which we have up there. But I wanted to quickly add that in. So if you're interested, please click on the Spreadshirt store below. Most of the designs are available on a range of things because I really am lazy. I just have it go auto select what are, and I have it set down to I make the minimal amount per thing because, well, mostly I see that sort of stuff as about community and people wanting to be part of the community and show it in some way than I do about making money from it. Which is probably a good thing, considering I make nothing from it, pretty much. So, that gets us to another Pearl Harbor question. Now, this is an interesting one for me because Dutovedlich? I'm not sure. Was there a plan to hit the facilities? I know Fushida's book is a lie, but I don't remember hearing that is actually part of the plan. Oh, that's a fun one, coming in straight with a contentious issue. Whilst I did a couple of comments, and I had to admit they didn't actually follow on from each other, probably. And there was an interesting back and forth, but whilst often chucked at him, I think if you consider the framing context of those interviews, it wouldn't really come up. As I said, my analysis theory is that it's an if carriers and battleships are destroyed, hit hard first wave, launch third wave and infrastructure. If either primary is not hit destroyed first wave, prepare for battle. Don't so much think of it as a fully prepared planned third wave, but next target operation goes well. I'll do a Scuttlebutt on it. And that's what I've done. So there was a whole discussion about this. Was the third wave for Pearl Harbor an actual thing? Well, yes, it was. It was. And here's the thing. People go, well, there's no planning for it. And there's quite obviously not going to be much planning for it. This is Japanese doctrine, is to launch. The first waves take out your primary targets. Once they're taken out, you take out ancillary targets like infrastructure. That's the Japanese doctrine. And it works quite well. The thing is, think about it this way. You plan the first two waves because you're launching them without having the aircraft recover. You don't know what aircraft are going to get back, in what state they're going to be back, and you don't know what they're going to find. If they get back and tell you, carriers destroyed, battleships destroyed, yes! Go take out the infrastructure. If they get back and tell you, battleships destroyed, carriers not destroyed, carriers weren't there. Nope, you do not leave this ship. I want to prepare scouts up. I want to know where the carriers are. Because the carriers are a primary target. So it makes sense not to launch the third wave. The thing I find strange is people debating over whether they should launch the third wave or not. The moment you can't find the carriers in harbour, it makes sense not to launch the third wave. But it also makes sense not to plan the third wave. You have the third wave as part of your doctrine. You have the ammunition. You have the air and the fuel. You can launch it with what aircraft you have available when they get back. You can load them up, go engage. Go do it. You don't need to plan that one through. We have a concept. We have a concept and a doctrine which would call for a third and perhaps even a fourth wave if we think we can get away with it. But we're only going to plan the ways we can launch without having to recover aircraft, because we won't know what aircraft we have available, in what state they're going to be for those follow-on waves. Because basically the third wave will be what aircraft from the first wave are able to be turned around quickly enough to be launched, if that is what you want to do, because you have already destroyed your first two your primaries. Which makes sense. Because again, think about it logically. If you have gone all the way to hit it, you might as well hit it properly. Still, if they do destroy the carriers, and if they do destroy the battleships, and if they do, does it make Pearl Harbor into a Kantei-Kessen operation? Does it make it a decisive battle? It does, but it wasn't really intended to be. And there was always a strong suspicion of the Japanese that they wouldn't find all the ships in harbour. There was always a strong suspicion. And that was what they were to an extent were planning for with their other operations and some of the things they were planning and looking into doing. So, to me, it makes sense they have a contingency for if things go really well, just as they have a contingency for if things go really badly. It makes sense, and it fits with the Japanese doctrine understanding at the time. So when people say Fushida's book is a lie, Fushida's book is not a lie. Personal accounts are rarely lies. They are often perspectives on the events as the people saw them and remember what they saw. This means there can be inaccuracies. If they are out and out fabrications, that is often quite easy to detect. The trouble is when you're looking for things to back up stuff which is a contingency. Because we will plan out in quite big detail the first 2 waves, because we know and have those aircraft, and those waves are definitely going in. The 3rd wave is a contingency, and it's probably not going to receive the same amount of planning, because by the point you're doing it, you're going to be sending aircraft and pilots who already have been over the target to go and further engage the target. You're going to want them to adapt to an extent on the fly, which the Japanese aviators could do, especially the ones of the generation doing the attack on Pearl Harbor. They're not the aviators of later in the war. They're the aviators of the beginning of the war are really, really quite well trained and really experienced and really good at adapting. And again, if we go down to their strikes on China and various other things, those are often 3-4 waves. Primary targets engaged in the first 2 waves. Yay. And then follow-on ways to widen the effect and include things like infrastructure. That's or wider infrastructure if their primary target was infrastructure. So that's their doctrine. It's not a case of it's a lie. It's a case of you have to approach it as that was a contingency they want to achieve. And Fushida himself was incredibly frustrated they didn't go for it, because he thinks it would have given Japan an advantage. But there again, he's saying that from the hindsight of the fact that the carrier didn't come out and stomp them. There was no American carrier to launch in a position to launch a strike on them at that point. If they'd launched the 3rd wave and a strike had come in and stomped their carriers, then that changes it dramatically. And that probably changes the memory of, should we do this or should we not? It makes sense not doing it when you consider the fact the carriers hadn't been found in Pearl Harbor and hadn't been destroyed. It makes sense then. If the carriers had been in Pearl Harbor, but the battle fleet hadn't been, then that would have changed things as well. I'm not sure if they would have still launched if they would have launched the 3rd wave then. They might have actually launched the 3rd wave if they destroyed the carriers in the first second wave. They might have launched the 3rd wave because their theory would be they could outrun the battle fleet for long enough for the aircraft to get back. But taking out the infrastructure would mean the battle fleet would be trapped in Pearl Harbor. I know it's a whole range of things they might think through, but we won't know what happened, because we won't know what would have happened under those circumstances because it didn't happen. We can only conjecture. Why not build battlecruisers in the 1930s? This is from Darren Home. Also starting in 1932, we have replaced the 5 Revenge-class slow battleships with 5 new fast 25,000-ton battlecruisers, each fitted with 2 triple 40-inch guns. Plus, should we have fitted the King George class with 3 times 15-inch triples? Okay, so why are you building 5 25,000-ton battlecruisers? You can build fast battleships if you're prepared to drop it down to 6 guns. You would build a fast battleship, because at this point the power density has reached the point at which you don't need to build a battlecruiser. If you wanted to, I suppose you could go for a fully armoured battlecruiser a la G3 or Vanguard. You could go for that, but I don't think you necessarily would. And also, I'm not really seeing the advantage of dropping down to such weakened vessels. Because again, the Revenge class are slow, yes, but they are full battleships, and they are battleships which therefore things like pretty much everyone has to respect. You might know you'll win the fight, but you're going to take damage doing it. That's what Bismarck and Tirpitz would have to think if they ran into them in the North Atlantic, escorting a convoy. They're going to take damage. They might win. They'll win, but they'll take damage. Charles knows now the same scenario. They do play tango with an R-class on occasion, and the R-class convoy comes away fine, because the R-class doesn't chase them, because it's not fast enough to chase them. So it doesn't even try. I also think it's strange you've gone for triple 14-inch at that point. At that point, under the 1930 treaty, there's a whole interesting story. You could go for, I suppose, you could justify it as 14-inch, but honestly, if you're going for something, you've got to think about survivability of your guns as well. And yeah, it's not really an advantage to doing that in the 1930s. Should the King George V class have been triple 15-inch turrets? Yes, I think they should have been. I think nicely, the British should have worked on a 15-inch gun, and they should never accept that 14-inch as the maximum. They should have said 15-inch, or just left it at 16-inch and ignored it, and gone with the 15-inch and standardised on the 15-inch across the fleet. And I think that would have been better. I think that would have been more sensible. And that's another reason not to do the whole 14-inch battlecruisers to replace the Revenge. Because the trouble is, a battlecruiser isn't fast enough, battlecruiser one word even, isn't fast enough against a fast battleship that it can, if it gets caught, that it can necessarily get away. And certainly that it cannot do the escort missions which the R's are going to end up doing. You might go, well, if they have these fast ships, they can use them to hunt. Hunt what? What do you want to fight with 6 triple 14-inch guns? Do you want to go fight a Congo? Or 6 14-inch guns? Do you want to go fight a Congo? Do you want to add 25,000 tons? Do you want to go fight a Scharnhorst or Knives and Well, they're fast battleships. They've got the subdivision, they've got the armoring, they are fast battleships. And yeah, they have 9 11-inch guns. You have 6 14-inch. You've got an advantage. You have. Not sure it's the advantage you'd want it to be, though. It's one of the things of, it sounds very sexy on paper, but once you think it through in terms of missions and profiles of what the Royal Navy needs to do, it's not really sensible. It's not really sensible to replace the R's with battle cruisers. Fast battleships, and if they could be armed with 9 14-inch guns, that would have been good. But the trouble is, again, there's the building holiday going on, and the fact that the British have built ships recently. They're called Nelson and Rodney, and that puts them in trouble when it comes to getting rid of stuff and replacing it. Now, it would have been sensible. It would have been, but it didn't happen. But there again, as I've said before, my view is Nelson and Rodney should have been F3 style fully armoured battlecruisers. About 28 something plus knots with triple 15s, because I think the 15-inch 50, which is what they would have had at that time, would have been a better gun overall for the British than the 16-inch, and would also meant the British would probably standardise across the 15-inch for everything logistically, and upgraded the Queen Elizabeths and the R's to 15-inch 50 over retaining 1920s and 1930s, which would have given them a solid force going forward. But that's the path not taken, because the path taken required we had a 16-inch gun ship. For status, For status. So this interested me, because Jet Driver, you came with an interesting comment, but I'm sorry, you've fallen for the thing which I often worry about people falling for. I disagree. The warship guns sizes are headed up. The problem is rate of fire. With drone swarms as a threat, you need more and smaller guns with a high rate of fire to deal with those. 5 inch is more than big enough for guided or sub-caliber or similar rounds. So, jet driver. This was on Darren Hamilton, the captain of HMS Rodney. So I think it was on possibly on a live. Um, Warship guns headed up. The main guns, I think, are headed up. From all the research, everything that's people going, the main guns are. I think they're going to carry, ships are going to start carrying more guns because of logistic issues in terms of being able to resupply VLS at sea and the vertical launch systems for missiles, etc. at sea and all these things. You can resupply ammunition for guns far easier than you can for missile systems. That's going to take a while to work out, probably a generation or so. So I think for the next generation, ships, you're going to see their number of guns going up and the guns being fitted to them going up. And the smaller guns deal with the rate of fire issue. That's what they're for. The larger guns are not necessarily there to deal with drone swarms. You know, not every weapon is there to deal with every threat. And today's big threat was, well, when you wrote that was drone swarms. I'm sure the next question I'm going to be asked is, what about secret missile launches from containers and containerized missiles and drones being launched? And how are we going to deal with those? And the answer is probably going to be, again, well, you're going to need to have slightly better intelligence. You're going to need to be studying these things more, but you're also going to need to have systems in place whereby if you detect these things coming in, you can engage them quickly. Which means guns, lasers, electronic warfare, and missiles. Active and passive systems. And you're going to have to work out a combination of all, and you're also going to have to work out how they fit around civilian infrastructure. But the thing is, does that mean I'm going to be firing my 5-inch gun in that scenario? Probably not. Or my 6-inch gun, or my 7-inch gun, or my 8-inch gun, or whatever size main gun I have. No. If I'm lucky, I'm going to have the largest weapon I want for that kind of scenario is a 3-inch gun. Because look at the rate of fire. If I'm relying on rate of fire and volume of fire I'm going to put up to block out them, I need 3-inch guns. That's it. That's the best rate of fire at that point, 76mm. And then below that, the 57, then it's a 40, and then it's a 30. And you can work out which one you need and what combination of them. And you probably do want a combination of all of them. In terms of balance of firepower and what you're going to put out. I prefer the 3-inch myself. I prefer a combination of 76 and 40mm guns. I think that's a better combination to provide you with the gun layer of defense against these scenarios. I'd also like to see lasers being more invested in, but they are being heavily invested in. And the thing is, it takes time sometimes to get these technologies to work. And that also takes power generation. So whilst I can understand what you're thinking about, you are falling into the trap of this main gun must also be able to deal with that, and it doesn't necessarily. No, the main gun can be for shore bombardment. It can be for AA against hypersonic weapons, a long way away from the ship, being able to put up a shrapnel cloud of big distance away from the ship, so it can engage a hypersonic at long range. It's not about dealing with drone swarms. And if it is dealing with drone swarms, it's going to be dealing with them again a long way away. And this is the problem with drone swarms as a rule, because people talk about them. Usually the drones they're talking about are the small, nimble ones. And they don't have a really long range. And this is this weird thing, because people often talk about, well, it's got a range of 100 miles. That's a long range. It's not in naval terms. In naval terms, if we're talking about ship-to-shore operations, we could be talking about being 200 miles offshore. So yes, that swarm is going to cause tremendous trouble for the craft moving through the 100 miles in the shore, but for the fleet which is 200 miles off the coast, they're never going to reach them. You're going to need bigger drones, and bigger drones are more expensive, and you're not going to possibly be able to swarm them as much, or if you do, they're going to be more visible and able to be seen coming from a further distance away. The thing is, these small drones, these lethal drones, usually they are dangerous at places like Straits of Gibraltar, Suez Canal, Panama Canal, harbours, those areas. Areas where ships do not have the space to manoeuvre. And that's things we're going to need to think about. We're going to need to think about how we do security of those areas going forward. Because those are also the areas where there's the greatest threat of those issues becoming a problem. So we're going to have to think about this. But we also need to think, when we're building weapon systems, we're building a whole ship. We're building, it's not just, this ship is not just having one gun, it's going to have a whole suite of weapons. And what matters is that how the overall capabilities of the vessel building into it balance out against its threats and allow it to fight. And allow it to defend itself. And whilst it's great to have a lot of general purpose weapons which can engage everything, it's also, this could be an argument used against tactical land attack missiles. Well, it can't do air defense. Why am I carrying that? It can't do air defense. But it's your tactical land attack missile. Your air defense missile can do a land attack. Yeah, not the same range, not in the same way as a tactical missile with longer range and ability to maneuver. Like surface-to-air missiles can be used in anti-ship mode. They can be. Is it advised? Not really. They're capable at it, but we really shouldn't. You really don't want to start using your standard missiles or your Sea Vipers for anti-ship operations. You really don't. It gets very expensive for not the results you're wanting very quickly. As good as they are. So, now it's the last sort of question we have, and there's some interesting ones. Pierre Thomas, thanks for doing this. You know, for me, the allure of the Scuttlebutt series are these little tidbits of contra-trivia you usually only learn after reading about 3 to 5 books about a specific topic. Yeah, it's when I realise I've read about a dozen books about so many topics. Okay, yeah. I'm glad you enjoyed them, Thomas. I do. Now, let's see everyone. So I guess the wait for you to explain why P139B wasn't the Gannet replacement goes to Scuttlebutt 10 or 11. I'm looking forward to it, as there is argument for and against both Hawkeye and P139B for the CVA-01 being cancelled, meaning we do not know for sure which one they were going for. They're going for Hawkeye. Politics. There was an idea, and it was being pushed through at quite high levels at this point, that if they went to Hawkeye, especially if the French were probably going to Hawkeye as well at the point, that then you end up with a NATO carrier plane in terms of airborne early warning, and or NATO or Western one, and there would be better interoperability then. So as nice it would be to have the P139B as a replacement for the Gannet, the odds are it would have been the Hawkeye. The odds are it would have been Hawkeye. And honestly, the British were looking at, again, the thing is, when you consider how many airframes the British are getting, if you get only 2 carriers, or even if you get 3, you're probably looking at about 12 to 15 airframes total. That's not a lot of airframes. The French have, I think it's 3 to 4 Hawkeyes. The US Navy operates closer to 50. So the thing is, the scale, especially for the investment of what you need, it works better if you build up. Now, if the French decided to jump into the B139B, and there had been scenarios which have been in favour, and the politicians could have worked out to see that as a European project, maybe things change. But the odds are it goes Hawkeye. Odds are it goes Hawkeye. Just for cost reasons more than anything. Because even at that point, that's what they're seeing the world through. Cost. With that being said, this either comes out after the Battle of Midway, or before the Battle of Midway, and therefore, if it's after the Battle of Midway, it'll come out before Admiral Percy Walker Knowles, the transforming the Canadian Navy Admiral. It's going to be interesting. Either way, interesting. There's a lot of good stuff coming up. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. Hope you have a fun week, and hope whichever week this comes out, and hope you're enjoying the videos. Toodles.